Well, they like to pass their director man when he's full of his wine. Why he calls
Hollywood is a crazy world with an even crazier history. It's conniving, competitive, and above all, risky. I think to analyze movies, it's important to understand the context surrounding the production of the movie. Not to mention, it's also extremely interesting.
There's no business like show business, like no business I know.
So let's separate Hollywood's life into 5 distinct eras and see the thievery, desperation, and failure in the industry. Starting with... The first movies actually began far away from Hollywood, California. All movies before 1911, like The Great Train Robbery and the first Frankenstein movie, were filmed entirely on the East Coast. In fact, the all-too-familiar term cliffhanger most likely originates from a series called The Peril of Pauline in 1914, which was filmed in the former motion picture capital of the country, Fort Lee, New Jersey. The move to Hollywood happened for several reasons. It was cheaper, there was nice weather year-round, and California provided a lot of distinct film locations. Nothing illustrates this better than Paramount's description of the region. One reason hardly talked about, however, is the fact that these million-dollar motion picture industries were fleeing to California so they could more easily break the law. In 1891, Thomas Edison patented the kinetograph, the technology used to film movies. With his patent, he had a legal monopoly on the entire industry. He even had control over movie projectors and film distributors. Edison aggressively sued many people using his invention, going so far as to hiring thugs to smash cameras and raid independent studios. Filmmakers like Fox and Paramount had to flee to the West Coast so they could make their movies outside of Edison's influence. So technically, any movie made before 1917 not from Thomas Edison's production company was completely illegal. In 1917, the United States Supreme Court ruled his monopoly unlawful and against public interest. It's interesting how an industry founded on breaking the rules is now aggressively taking video essays down on YouTube despite their obvious fair use. But I digress.
Shall we try it right through? Won't you sit down, Mr. Gordon?
By the late 1910s, America's cinema transitioned into what we're familiar with, the booming Hollywood industry. The industry skyrocketed. A key innovation was the addition of dialogue in the late 1920s, which kept the industry afloat, popular, and innovative throughout the Great Depression. The era between 1917 and the late 1940s is commonly referred to as studio system Hollywood. This is when production companies had decade-long contracts with actors, directors, and writers. If you think the movie industry is monopolized now, know that 5 studios had control of absolutely everything in the 1940s. Each major company had ownership of actors, directors, distribution, and even the movie theaters. Creators could only make it in the industry if they stuck with one company for almost their entire careers by signing long-term and sometimes very unfair contracts. Out of this era came classics such as Gone with the Wind, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the original King Kong. One interesting aspect of this time period is that with so many movies being made and so many people flocking to the theater, movie companies could afford producing movies with medium-sized budgets and scripts that weren't necessarily blockbuster material, like Citizen Kane and Casablanca. Nowadays, big companies pool most of their time and resources into several big-budget movies a year, which is quite a shame.
1, 2, 3. I know, I'm fine.
The end of this era came from another battle with the courts. The Supreme Court ruled against Paramount Pictures, saying ownership of the theaters and distribution of their films was a restriction of fair trade. This loss of control of distribution protected independent filmmakers, but meant a decline in the big industry. The next hit to movie popularity was television. Television hurt the industry since many people could stay at home to get their entertainment. Movie viewership plummeted. In the 30s, 60% of people went to the movie theaters at least once a week. But since the 1960s, the number has consistently stuck around only 10%. To combat TV, movies had to do what TV couldn't do: big screens and big budgets. The Hollywood epic came into fruition. This is when movies got absolutely insane. CinemaScope lenses stretched the screen to almost twice the size of conventional film. There were movies like Cleopatra in 1963, which was the highest grossing film of the year and still didn't make back its budget. One of its huge 100-foot set pieces had to be built twice in 2 separate countries because the lead, Elizabeth Taylor, got sick. Soon the new Hollywood era broke through. Starting with Bonnie and Clyde, film school trained directors gained major influence in the industry, as opposed to the producers of old Hollywood. With low-budget hits like Jaws by Steven Spielberg, Star Wars by George Lucas, and The Godfather by Francis Coppola, producers gave more control to the filmmakers, who in turn produced more provocative, diverse, and innovative movies. Personally, I find this atmosphere the most conducive to amazing filmmaking, but it came at a price. With such freedom, several films got way out of hand. Many directors took their power too far, and movie budgets skyrocketed skyrocketed out of control. Apocalypse Now is an extreme example. There's a documentary on the production process of the movie called Heart of Darkness that I absolutely recommend. I cannot come close to describing the mayhem of making that movie in such a short video. Hurricanes, heart attacks, a coup in the country they filmed, it's crazy. With Apocalypse Now in 1979 and the box office bomb Heaven's Gate in 1980 bankrupting a huge production company, producers tightened their grip on filmmakers, which makes absolute sense.
What happened was in the 70s, all those filmmakers that did get final cut, the budgets grew and grew, and each one after the other, had a financial disaster that almost tore down the studios.
If you treat the movie industry like an actual business, it's definitely one of the riskiest. One movie the public hates and it cripples the company. Millions are on the line, and with continuously decreasing ticket sales, companies had to adapt. Now we're at the movie industry as we know it today. With home video in the 90s and streaming services like Netflix, it's hardly worth it to drive all the way to a movie theater anymore. So companies make a handful of movies and promote them like crazy. Superhero and fantasy movies dominate box office sales because those are the movies that are worth seeing on the big screen. Movies like Popstar and The Nice Guys bomb this year because they're light comedies, and frankly, I'm willing to wait for them to come to Netflix in a couple months. What's amazing about this era is that it gets easier and easier to make feature-length movies. I bought a used DSLR camera, tripod, memory card, case, and editing software for less than $600. You don't need a huge movie conglomerate to get your voice heard and your art noticed. Hollywood becomes more and more obsolete every day. So pick up your iPhone, hit record, and say action. Thanks for watching.
Here it is, a groove slightly transformed. Just a bit of a break from the norm. Just a little something to break the monotony of all that hard.